She was beaten and left to die. A lone cowboy found her and changed everything the sun had just begun to set over the endless plains of Texas, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. Emily wiped the sweat from her brow as she finished her shift at the small diner on the edge of town. The air smelled of dust and dry grass, carrying the faint scent of livestock from nearby ranches. She adjusted the strap of her worn backpack and started walking toward the dirt road that would take her home. She had grown up in this town, knew the stretches of prairie like the back of her hand. But tonight, the fading light made the open fields feel strangely unfamiliar. The road was quiet, almost too quiet. Emily could hear the whisper of the wind through the tall grasses, the occasional call of a distant bird, and the faint crunch of her boots on the gravel. Normally, she liked this time of day. She liked the way the world seemed to slow down just before nightfall. But tonight, a shiver ran down her spine. She brushed it off as the chill that always came with the evening, though a small, uneasy feeling lingered in her chest. Halfway along the road, she noticed the dark shapes of abandoned buildings looming in the distance. Their roofs were sagging, their windows shattered, and their walls were covered in layers of dust and graffiti. Emily quickened her pace. She didn't know why, but her instincts told her to get through this stretch as fast as she could. Her mind wandered to the safety of her little apartment at the edge of town, where her cat, Whiskers, would be waiting for her. The thought made her smile faintly, easing some of the tension in her shoulders. Suddenly, a sharp noise cracked through the quiet air. Emily froze, her heart skipping a beat. It was a branch snapping under someone's weight, or maybe something falling. She glanced around, but the shadows of the prairie stretched long and distorted, hiding everything beyond a few feet. "Probably just a deer," she whispered to herself, trying to sound brave. But her voice sounded small and fragile in the vast emptiness. She continued walking, faster now, her backpack bouncing lightly against her back. As she rounded a bend, she felt it before she saw it, a sudden, forceful shove from behind. She stumbled, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through her shoulder and she let out a sharp cry. Emily turned, her eyes wide with fear, but the low light and the shifting shadows made it impossible to see clearly. Panic surged through her. She scrambled to her feet, but before she could run, strong hands grabbed her, pulling her backward. She fought, kicking and screaming, but it was no use. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Emily's mind raced. She thought about screaming for help, but the nearest house was miles away and the road was empty. She had never felt so alone. Every step she tried to take, every movement to escape, was met with resistance. The attackers were quick and strong, and the world around her seemed to blur. Her backpack fell to the ground, spilling a few of her belongings into the dirt. Time became meaningless. Emily felt herself being dragged along the gravel, her hands scraped and bleeding. She couldn't understand why this was happening, why someone would want to hurt her. The sky above turned a deeper shade of purple, and the first stars began to appear, twinkling coldly in the distance. Emily's lungs burned as she gasped for air, and her knees hit the ground hard. The attackers didn't say much, only low, indistinct murmurs. Fear and confusion overwhelmed her, and she began to cry silently, wishing desperately for anyone to come and help. Then suddenly everything stopped. She was thrown onto the ground one last time and left lying there. Pain radiated through her body. Her vision was blurred and her thoughts were scattered. The cold wind whipped across her skin, cutting through her clothes and making her shiver uncontrollably. She tried to move, tried to call out, but her voice barely reached above a whisper. She felt helpless, abandoned, and utterly alone. The prairie stretched endlessly around her, empty and indifferent to her suffering. Hours seemed to pass. The sky grew darker and the air turned cold. Emily's body ached, every movement sending sharp pain through her limbs. She could feel the hardness of the ground beneath her, the roughness of the dirt, the tiny stones pressing into her skin. Yet through the pain, a flicker of will remained. She told herself quietly that she had to survive. She had to hold on even if she didn't know how. Her mind clung to memories of her family, her friends, and her small, warm apartment. That small hope became a fragile thread that kept her conscious, fighting against the overwhelming fear. As she lay there, listening to the quiet whispers of the wind, she became aware of another sound, a faint, rhythmic thud in the distance. At first, she thought it might be her imagination, but then it came again, steady and deliberate. She turned her head slightly, straining her eyes, and saw a figure in the dim moonlight. It was a man riding a horse along the trail. Emily's heart jumped. Could this be real? Could someone actually be coming to help her? The rider moved closer, his silhouette sharp against the fading night sky. He stopped his horse when he noticed her, his posture alert and cautious. Emily tried to call out again, but her voice was too weak. The man dismounted quickly, his boots crunching on the gravel, and ran to her side. He knelt down gently, placing a hand on her shoulder to steady her. Hey, it's okay. You're safe now," he said in a calm, steady voice. Emily's tears flowed freely, relief mixing with exhaustion. The man, Caleb, as he would later introduce himself, examined her quickly but carefully. He noticed the bruises forming on her arms and the cuts on her legs, but more than anything, he recognized the shock and fear in her eyes. Without a word, he lifted her gently, supporting her weight as best he could. Emily leaned heavily against him, too weak to walk on her own. The horse stood patiently nearby, snorting softly, as if it too understood the urgency of the moment. Caleb guided her along the trail toward a small ranch he owned. The journey was slow, careful, and filled with quiet reassurances. Every step hurt, but Emily clung to the fact that she was no longer alone. With every word Caleb spoke, every steady movement he made, a small piece of her fear eased. She realized that even in the vast emptiness of the prairie, help could appear when least expected. By the time they reached the ranch, the moon was high in the sky, casting silver light across the fields. Caleb led her inside, offering her water and warmth by the fireplace. Emily sat shivering, her body trembling from both pain and relief. Caleb moved around calmly, gathering supplies, tending to her wounds, and making sure she was as comfortable as possible. Emily had never met someone so quietly strong, so patient, and so kind. In that moment, amidst the pain and fear, she felt a tiny spark of hope for the first time since the attack. As she sipped the warm water Caleb had offered, Emily realized something important. The world was harsh and unpredictable, yes, but it was also capable of extraordinary kindness. And in the middle of a night that had seemed so dark and endless, she had found a lifeline in a man she didn't yet know but who had already changed everything. The quiet prairie, once a place of fear, had become a place of safety, at least for tonight. For the first time since the attack, Emily allowed herself to close her eyes. She wasn't alone, and for the first time in hours she felt, maybe, just maybe, she could survive. Emily woke slowly the next morning, the pale light of dawn filtering through the small window of Caleb's ranch cabin. The warmth from the fire had faded, leaving the room cool, but her body felt a little lighter than the night before. For the first time, she realized that she had survived the attack. She looked down at her arms and legs, still sore and bruised, and felt a small, trembling sense of relief. She had endured the worst, and she was still here. Caleb was already awake, tending to the morning chores. The low sound of his voice hummed through the cabin as he called to his horses and checked the small pen where a few goats wandered. Emily watched him quietly, unsure if she should speak. She felt awkward, exposed, and grateful all at once. He had saved her life, yet here she was, a stranger in his home. How could she repay him for such kindness? How could she ever explain the fear, the helplessness, the shame of what had happened to her? Caleb noticed her stirring and came over with a gentle smile. "Morning," he said softly. "Sleep okay?" His voice was calm, steady, and comforting. Emily nodded, unsure if she could trust herself to speak yet. Caleb didn't push. He simply handed her a cup of warm tea and some bread. "You need to eat something," he said. "It will help your strength come back." She took the cup with shaking hands, the warmth of it spreading through her chest. She sipped slowly, trying not to think about the pain or the attack. Caleb sat nearby, giving her space, yet ready to respond if she needed anything. It struck her how naturally he moved, how easy it seemed for him to care without expecting anything in return. Emily realized that she had never met anyone quite like him before. As the morning passed, Emily began to move more carefully around the cabin. Caleb had prepared a small area for her to rest and recover. A cot with clean sheets sat in the corner, and a small blanket was folded neatly on top. He had even fetched some basic first aid supplies to tend to her cuts and bruises. Emily felt overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. She had been so alone in her life before this, and now someone had gone out of his way just to help her. After breakfast, Caleb suggested they take a short walk outside, just to stretch her legs and let her get some fresh air. Emily hesitated. The world outside still felt dangerous, still full of shadows and unknown threats. But Caleb's steady presence gave her courage. Together, they stepped onto the wide porch of the cabin. The morning sun bathed the prairie in golden light, the grasses swaying gently in the breeze. The horizon seemed endless, yet for the first time, Emily felt a strange sense of calm amidst its vastness. Caleb led her slowly along a small trail near the cabin. "Take your time," he said. "No rush. You don't have to do more than you feel ready for." Emily nodded, grateful. Each step was careful, her body still sore, but with every movement she felt a little stronger. She noticed the simplicity and beauty of the ranch. The way the horses nuzzled each other, the soft bleating of the goats, and the distant sound of a stream trickling over rocks. It was a peaceful world, so different from the chaos and fear she had left behind. During their walk, Emily began to talk quietly about herself. She told Caleb about her job at the diner, her small apartment, and her life before the attack. She spoke cautiously, careful not to reveal too much, yet feeling an odd comfort in his calm, patient listening. Caleb didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, offered quiet encouragement, and asked gentle questions. Emily realized that she had been starved for conversation that wasn't rushed or distracted, for someone who could listen without judgment. As days passed, Emily's strength began to return. Caleb continued to care for her, but he never treated her as weak or helpless. Instead, he encouraged her to move, to stretch, and to take small steps toward regaining her independence. He showed her how to feed the animals, how to gather firewood safely, and even how to ride a horse slowly. Each task was a small victory, a reminder that life could go on even after fear and pain. Emily's nights, however, were the hardest. Sleep didn't come easily. She dreamed of the attack, of being alone on the cold ground, of the pain and fear she had felt. Each dream left her waking in a cold sweat, heart racing. Caleb noticed her restlessness and quietly adjusted her bed, brought her warm tea, and sat nearby until she felt calm enough to rest. Slowly, night by night, Emily began to feel safer, knowing that someone was there, watching over her, keeping her from harm. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Caleb and Emily sat on the porch together. The air was cool, the prairie stretching endlessly before them. Emily broke the silence, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You saved my life. You gave me hope when I thought there was none left." Caleb smiled softly, shaking his head. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You survived because you wanted to. I just helped you along the way." Emily looked at him, studying his calm face, the quiet strength in his eyes. She realized that he didn't just save her body. He saved a part of her spirit that she thought had died along with that night. She felt a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something more complex that she couldn't yet name. Caleb's presence had become a lifeline, a steady force that reminded her that even after darkness, light could return. Over the next few weeks, Emily began to leave the cabin more often. She explored the fields with Caleb, learning the rhythms of the ranch. She learned how to care for the animals, how to gather food, and how to move confidently across the land. Each day, her body grew stronger, but more importantly, her mind began to heal. She felt capable again, able to face the world, even if the shadows of fear still lingered. One afternoon, while checking on the horses, Emily noticed a small bird struggling to fly. Its wing was bent, and it fell repeatedly to the ground. Without hesitation, she gently cupped the bird in her hands. Caleb watched quietly as she cared for it, showing the same patience and tenderness that he had shown her. Emily realized that in caring for this small, fragile creature, she was reclaiming a part of herself she had thought was lost. The bird's eventual flight mirrored her own journey toward freedom, strength, and hope. Throughout this time, Caleb became more than just a caretaker. He became a friend, a guide, and a steady presence in her life. He never pushed, never demanded, but always offered support, wisdom, and kindness. Emily began to share more about her dreams, her fears, and even her small joys. She discovered that trust could be rebuilt, that human connection could heal wounds that seemed impossible to overcome. As Emily's confidence grew, so did her courage. She began to speak about the attack with Caleb, slowly piecing together what had happened, why it had happened, and how she had survived. The conversations were difficult, filled with tears and pauses, but Caleb never left her side. He listened, offered comfort, and helped her see that surviving was not just about enduring pain. It was about reclaiming her life. One morning, as the first light of dawn touched the prairie, Emily stood at the edge of the field, looking out over the horizon. She thought about the night of the attack, the terror, and the cold emptiness. But she also thought about Caleb, the cabin, the animals, and the small victories she had achieved. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. She had survived and she was beginning to live again. Caleb approached quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Ready for today?" he asked gently. Emily smiled, feeling the weight of fear lift from her chest, if only slightly. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I think I am." Together, they walked back toward the cabin, ready to face another day, another small step toward healing, and another chance to rebuild what had been broken. That evening, as Emily lay in bed, she thought about how quickly life could change, how fragile it could be, and yet how resilient the human spirit could also be. She had been beaten and left alone, but she had been found. And in being found, she had discovered courage, friendship, and a new beginning. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Emily believed that she could face whatever came next. The prairie stretched endlessly outside, quiet and vast, but no longer frightening. In the safety of Caleb's care and the warmth of the small cabin, Emily felt the first real stirrings of hope. She knew that life could still be beautiful even after the darkest night. And she knew that sometimes, the most unexpected people, like a lone cowboy on a quiet prairie, could change everything. The days turned into weeks, and Emily's body grew stronger, but her mind was still carrying the weight of that terrible night. Even with Caleb's steady presence, she sometimes woke in the middle of the night, heart racing, haunted by the memory of the attack. She would sit up, clutching the blanket around her, listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch, the gentle lowing of the cows, the soft rustle of the trees, and the rhythmic breathing of Caleb, who always seemed to be awake before her. Caleb noticed her restless nights. He never asked questions or pressed for explanations, but he offered small acts of comfort that made a difference. Sometimes he would bring her warm tea before sunrise. Other times he would sit beside her on the porch, silently watching the horizon until her trembling chest slowed and her mind settled. Emily began to realize that healing was not just about the body. It was about trust, safety, and the small gestures that made someone feel protected and seen. One morning, Emily decided she wanted to try something she had not dared in months, walking to the edge of the nearby stream alone. The water ran clear, reflecting the sky and trees, a gentle reminder that life continued even after hardship. She felt nervous, her steps cautious, but with every movement she took, she felt a little more control returning to her life. She paused by the stream, watching a bird dip into the water and rise again with a small fish in its beak. The simple act felt miraculous, and Emily smiled quietly to herself. She realized that nature itself could be healing, a gentle teacher of patience and resilience. Caleb found her sitting there and joined her quietly, not speaking at first. He sat down on the grass beside her and looked out over the flowing water. "It's good to see you out here," he said finally. "Little steps, that's all it takes." Emily nodded. She had learned that healing was never a straight line. There were setbacks, moments of fear, and times when the past felt too heavy to carry. But with each small step, she gained courage, and with courage came hope. As Emily grew stronger physically, Caleb encouraged her to take the next step, reporting the attack to the authorities. Emily's stomach knotted at the thought. She was terrified not just of facing the attackers, but of reliving the night in front of strangers. She hesitated, tears forming in her eyes. Caleb placed a hand gently on hers. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. "I'll be with you every step of the way. You've survived so much already. You are stronger than you think." Finally, after several days of preparation and encouragement, Emily agreed. Caleb drove her to the small police station in town. She felt a storm of emotions, fear, anxiety, and uncertainty, but she also felt a spark of determination. The moment she stepped into the station, she realized that this was part of reclaiming her life, taking back the power that had been taken from her. With Caleb by her side, she gave her statement. The officers listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions gently. Emily felt a mixture of relief and vulnerability, but she also felt proud of herself. She had faced a terrifying step, and she had done it. Returning to the ranch, Emily felt both exhausted and exhilarated. She sank into a chair on the porch, the evening breeze brushing her face. Caleb handed her a cup of tea and smiled. "You did well today," he said. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. She had survived, she had reported the crime, and she was slowly reclaiming her life. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel a sense of accomplishment. The road ahead was still long, but she was no longer completely at the mercy of fear. In the following days, Emily continued to rebuild her confidence. She rode horses with Caleb, learning to trust herself and the animals under her care. She helped tend the animals, gather firewood, and prepare meals. Each task was a reminder that she could be strong, capable, and independent. Caleb never pushed her beyond what she was ready for, but he offered encouragement and guidance, showing her that she could achieve more than she had thought possible. One afternoon, Emily decided to return to the site of the attack, not out of desire, but out of necessity. She wanted to confront the place where she had felt so powerless. Caleb accompanied her, walking quietly beside her as they approached the stretch of road where the tragedy had occurred. The memory hit her sharply, the pain, the fear, the sense of being alone. Emily's knees trembled and her chest tightened, but she forced herself to take slow, deep breaths. Caleb didn't speak. He simply held her hand, letting her know that she was not alone. Standing there, Emily felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and resolve. She realized that the attackers had taken a piece of her life, but they could not take her spirit. With Caleb's support, she was reclaiming it, one small step at a time. She allowed herself to cry, releasing months of tension and fear. When she finished, she felt lighter, stronger, and ready to face the next chapter of her life. Healing was not linear. There were days when Emily felt despair creeping back, triggered by a shadow, a loud noise, or even a sudden memory. Caleb was always there, patient and unwavering, helping her to ground herself, to remember that she had survived and that she was no longer alone. He taught her simple techniques to calm her mind and body, breathing exercises, gentle stretches, and the practice of focusing on the present moment. Over time, these tools became her lifeline, helping her regain control over her thoughts and fears. One day, as they worked in the fields, Emily began to open up about her dreams, things she had once wished for but had buried under the weight of fear. She spoke about traveling, learning new skills, and helping others who had faced hardships. Caleb listened, nodding with encouragement. "You have so much strength," he said, "and one day you'll inspire others with it too." Emily felt a warmth in her chest, realizing that she was not just surviving, she was growing, becoming more than she had been before. Emily also began to reflect on the people in her life before the attack. She reached out to old friends and family, rebuilding connections that had weakened over time. It was difficult at first, sharing her trauma with those she loved, but she found that honesty and openness brought healing as well. She discovered that people cared. That support could be found not just in strangers like Caleb, but also in the familiar faces of those who had always been there. The bond between Emily and Caleb deepened during these months. It was not a bond built on romance alone, though there was a quiet respect and affection between them. It was a bond built on trust, patience, and shared experience. Caleb had seen her at her most vulnerable, had cared for her without expectation, and had guided her toward healing. Emily realized that sometimes, the people who change our lives are not the ones we expect. They are the ones who offer quiet strength when we need it most. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the prairie, Emily reflected on how far she had come. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the wind rustling through the grass like a gentle whisper. She thought about the night of the attack, the fear and pain that had seemed insurmountable. And she thought about Caleb, his steady presence, and the small victories that had slowly rebuilt her confidence. She realized that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found, and sometimes it arrived in the most unexpected forms. As the weeks turned into months, Emily began to take more independent steps. She ventured into town alone, shopped for supplies, and even visited the police station to check on the investigation of her attackers. Each small action was a victory, a declaration that she would no longer be defined by fear. She was reclaiming her life, piece by piece, learning to trust herself, and discovering that strength could come from the most unexpected experiences. Caleb remained a constant presence, not as a crutch, but as a guide and friend. He celebrated her victories with quiet pride, offering encouragement without pressure. Emily realized that her recovery was not just about surviving the past, it was about embracing the present and building a future. She had learned resilience, courage, and the power of human kindness. And in doing so, she discovered that even after great suffering, life could still hold beauty, joy, and connection. By the end of this period, Emily felt transformed. She was no longer the fragile, frightened woman who had been left alone on the prairie. She was stronger, wiser, and more capable than she had ever imagined. The trauma of that night would always be a part of her story, but it no longer controlled her. With Caleb's support, her own determination, and the small victories that marked each day, Emily had begun to reclaim her life fully. And as she looked across the prairie one evening, the golden light of the setting sun warming her face, she understood something profoundly simple. Survival was only the beginning. The true power lay in healing, in finding strength after weakness, and in allowing others to help when we cannot do it alone. Emily had been broken, yes, but she had been found. And in being found, she had discovered a life worth living, a spirit unbroken, and a future filled with hope. The months passed slowly but surely, each day bringing Emily a little more strength, a little more confidence, and a little more hope. The prairie, once a place of fear and pain, had become a sanctuary, a place where she could breathe, learn, and heal. With Caleb by her side, she had rebuilt her life, piece by piece, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of stability she had never thought possible. Emily woke early one morning to the soft chirping of birds. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm, golden glow across the fields. She stretched her arms and felt the solid, comforting ache of muscles that had grown stronger over the past months. Each ache was a reminder of progress, a sign that she was capable, resilient, and alive. She walked to the small kitchen in the cabin where Caleb was already preparing breakfast. "Good morning," he said with a smile, his voice steady and kind. Emily returned the smile, feeling a calm she had not known before. After breakfast, Emily decided to take a walk to the edge of the property, something she had once feared. The prairie stretched endlessly before her, the wind softly rustling the tall grasses. As she walked, memories of the attack resurfaced, but they no longer filled her with paralyzing fear. Instead, she felt a quiet strength, a determination that she would not let the past define her. Caleb walked beside her, as he always had, not leading, not pushing, but simply offering his presence as support. The two of them reached a small hill overlooking the ranch. Emily paused, looking out over the fields, the streams, and the distant mountains. She felt a profound sense of peace. The world was still vast, still unpredictable, but she had learned that she could face it. The prairie that had once seemed so lonely now felt like a place of possibility. Caleb stood beside her, quiet and steady, sharing the moment without words. Emily realized that some things, like trust, care, and genuine human connection, did not need to be spoken aloud to be felt deeply. In the following weeks, Emily began to think about the future in ways she had not dared before. She wanted to help others who had faced hardships, to use her experience to bring comfort, support, and hope. With Caleb's encouragement, she began volunteering in the local community, assisting at the small shelter for women who had experienced trauma. At first, she was nervous, unsure if she could handle the stories, the pain, and the sadness. But she quickly discovered that sharing her strength, her presence, and her empathy brought comfort not just to others, but to herself as well. One day, a young woman at the shelter reminded Emily of herself just months before. The woman was frightened, quiet, and unsure of how to trust again. Emily knelt beside her, taking her hand gently. "I know it's hard," she said softly, "but you are not alone. You can get through this. I'm living proof that healing is possible." The young woman looked at her with wide eyes, and Emily felt a warmth in her chest. Helping someone else face fear and begin to heal was a powerful reminder of how far she had come. Meanwhile, Caleb continued his steady support. He never interfered, never judged, and never demanded. He simply offered his strength and experience as a guide. Together, they worked on the ranch, cared for the animals, and enjoyed quiet evenings watching the sunset. Emily learned more about Caleb's life, the struggles, the solitude, and the hard work of running a ranch in a remote part of Texas. She began to appreciate his resilience, his patience, and the quiet kindness that had saved her life. Emily also began to reconnect with friends and family in town. She realized that the attack had isolated her, not just physically but emotionally. Rebuilding those connections was not easy. There were awkward conversations, tears, and moments of doubt. But each reunion brought relief, joy, and a renewed sense of belonging. Emily discovered that people cared deeply, that love and friendship could survive distance, time, and hardship. These relationships, combined with her bond with Caleb, created a strong network of support that she could rely on. One afternoon, Emily received news that the authorities had captured her attackers. The process of justice was slow, but the knowledge that they could no longer harm her brought a sense of closure. She felt a mixture of relief and quiet sadness, relief that she was safe, sadness for the violence she had endured. Yet she did not feel powerless. She had survived, she had reclaimed her life, and she had found courage she did not know she possessed. As summer approached, Emily began to dream about traveling and exploring new places, something she had once considered impossible. Caleb encouraged her, reminding her that the world was not as frightening as it had seemed. Emily realized that she wanted to experience life fully, to embrace joy, adventure, and new challenges. She knew that leaving the safety of the ranch would be a test, but she also knew that she was ready. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. Emily also started thinking about love and companionship. She had grown close to Caleb over the past months, but their bond was built on trust, respect, and deep friendship. She knew that any relationship would require time, understanding, and mutual care. One evening, while sitting by the fire, Emily reflected on how much she had grown. She realized that she could open her heart again, not just to Caleb, but to the world. The fear that had once dominated her life had been replaced by a quiet confidence and hope for the future. As the months turned into a year, Emily fully settled into a new rhythm. She divided her time between the ranch, the community, and personal growth. She learned to ride, to care for the animals, and to embrace the simple joys of daily life. She volunteered regularly, helping others face challenges she had once endured. Each act of kindness, each small success, strengthened her confidence and sense of purpose. She had transformed her fear into strength, her pain into empathy, and her isolation into connection. Caleb and Emily continued to share quiet moments together, each appreciating the other's presence. They worked as a team on the ranch, supported each other in times of struggle, and celebrated small victories. Emily felt grateful for the man who had found her on that dark night, who had cared for her without expectation, and who had guided her toward healing. She realized that sometimes, life's most profound changes come from the people who appear when we least expect them. One crisp autumn morning, Emily stood on the porch of the cabin, looking out over the fields. The leaves on the trees had turned gold and red, and the air carried a gentle chill. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey she had taken, from fear and helplessness to strength and independence. The prairie, once a place of terror, had become a sanctuary, a classroom, and a home. She had learned resilience, courage, and the power of human kindness. Emily reflected on the lessons she had learned. She understood now that life could be fragile, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel. But she also knew that life could be beautiful, filled with hope, love, and connection. She had learned that it was possible to rise from pain, to reclaim one's life, and to help others along the way. Her heart felt light, her mind calm, and her spirit strong. Caleb joined her on the porch, standing quietly beside her. Emily turned to him and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Caleb smiled back, his eyes reflecting the warmth of the rising sun. "You did this yourself," he said. "I just helped you see it." Emily nodded, realizing the truth of his words. She had survived, healed, and rebuilt her life through her own courage and determination. But Caleb's presence had made the journey possible. That evening, as the sun set and the sky glowed in shades of pink and gold, Emily felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced the darkest night of her life, endured unimaginable fear, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. She had discovered the depth of human kindness, the power of resilience, and the importance of connection. And she had learned that even when life seems bleak, hope can appear in the most unexpected forms. Emily knew that her journey was not over. Life would always have challenges, moments of doubt, and reminders of the past. But she also knew that she had the tools, the strength, and the support to face them. She had been broken and left alone, but she had been found. And in being found, she had discovered a life filled with possibility, joy, and meaning. With Caleb beside her, the prairie stretching endlessly before them, and the warmth of hope in her heart, Emily took a deep breath. The wind whispered through the grasses, the animals moved quietly in the fields, and the sun dipped low, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Emily smiled, knowing that she had survived, healed, and discovered a life worth living. She had been beaten, left alone, and terrified, but she had been found and everything had changed. In the quiet of the prairie, Emily realized that life, no matter how harsh, could be beautiful again. She had learned to trust, to love, to heal, and to live fully. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, she felt a deep, unshakable peace. The journey had been long, the pain had been real, but the ending, the life she was now living, was brighter, stronger, and more meaningful than she had ever imagined.